Hello everyone and welcome back. In the last video, we introduced you to several ways of animating in Houdini, with the primary focus being on keyframe animation. Now, of course, we did some very simple keyframe animation stuff, but we didn't do anything that was really fun. So I thought it would be cool if before we moved on, we took one video and we did a very small and simple animation project that's based solely off keyframe animation. But I thought it would be a little more fun if we added some twists and turns in there. So that's what we're going to do in this video. We're going to take that jet that Steve modeled out back in the Introduction to Polygonal Modeling lesson, and we're going to animate it. But while, of course, we need to do everything through keyframe animation, we're going to make things a little more interesting by, one, having the jet follow a path. So we're going to have a motion path, and our jet will simply move along that path. Going one step further, we're going to animate our missile, just one of them, being fired off. Now that poses a very interesting challenge. Steve, grab that jet real quick and rotate it around. Everyone, take a look at what happens when Steve rotates this jet around. So what's going on with the missiles?
The missiles, since they are parented to the jet, are rotating with the jet.
That's right, and that is exactly how a parent-child relationship should behave. Now grab the missile that we're going to animate and move them down.
Cool. So let's say we've just dropped this missile, and let's even go as far as saying we've shot this missile. Yeah.
Okay, now go back to the jet. Let's say the jet wants to fly out of the way.
So let's say the jet was going to bank. Look at the missile.
Oh, that's not good.
And even worse.
Yeah, that's really bad. So in this video, we're also going to introduce you to a very simple rig that can be used to have the missile decide, who do I want to be my parent? Maybe I want the jet to be my parent for a while so I can ride along for the ride or for the flight, and then I get fired off, and now I need to be able to think, on my own.
Yeah.
So how are we going to set that up? So this is going to be a lot of fun. Let's go ahead and undo a couple of times just to kind of put things all back together. Now, I would like to just remind everyone that this is a video that I am adding in as sort of a bonus. This is a just for fun type video. Steve is going to be asked to put this animation together quickly, so don't look for any Pixar quality stuff coming from this, because to get beautiful animation, you need to spend a lot of time working with motion curves, and while Steve can do a wonderful job with animation, we don't have that kind of time, especially with just a quick bonus video. So what I'd like to do first is go ahead and jump over to the blue board over here on the whiteboard and draw out just a quick representation of what it is that we're going to put together that is going to help us solve this parenting dilemma.
Cool.
So let's begin with our jet. So there is our node representing the jet, and up under the jet we have two children. We have missile 1 and we have missile 2. Now the problem we have is missile 2 cannot be shot off in this form. I mean, it can be, but the problem we have is we're going to be working against any sort of transformations applied to the jet, and that would simply be a nightmare. So how are we going to solve this problem? Well, we're going to use some nulls. Now, we have seen nulls just a little bit as we've worked our way through various lessons in Houdini, and we told you that nulls are an excellent way of adding custom parameters. Sometimes they're a great way of just providing a transformation place, if you will, up at the object level that we can parent other things to. And you guys haven't seen that yet, but you're about to. But nulls don't contain any geometry that gets rendered out. It's just a handy node that does nothing but does a lot, if you want to look at it that way. So let's go ahead, come in here real quick, and erase this missile number 2. What we're going to do is we're going to bring one of these nulls in. So here we are at null number 1. And we're going to have the null parented into the jet. And we will position, as a matter of fact, I'll come up here and give you guys a very crude drawing. So here's our wing, and we can see through our wing. Here's our missile up underneath it. And really we can position it wherever we want, but it makes sense to position it something like that. So up under the wing, where the missile would connect, that is where we're going to put the null, have the null parented into the jet, so everything that happens with the jet will influence the null. Now, we need to take our missile and parent it to the null. But this poses a problem. So if I take missile number 2 and make it a child of null 1, well, once again, when the jet rotates, the null's going to rotate, and when the null rotates, it's going to cause the missile to rotate. So technically, we've made the whole situation a little bit more complicated by adding in an extra node, making our network a little bit bigger, but the result in the end is exactly the same. But what if we had a method or the ability to blend between two different parents? So it's like, on a good day, I want you to be my father. On a bad day, I want this guy over here to be my father. We have that kind of ability inside of Houdini, so that's what we're going to take a look at now. What we're going to do is we're going to use what is known as a blend node to allow us to do this. So let's go ahead and, actually I'm just going to erase all this out. Now, and let me bring my brush back. Let's draw out another null over here. So we're going to create a second null in the scene. Starting out, we don't care where he's at. He can be anywhere. He's not going to render out. It's not going to be a problem. And he is going to be the object in which we'll animate that's going to represent our missile's motion. We're going to take both of these nulls and we are going to wire them into a blend node. This blend node gives us weights, which means basically we can animate these weight parameters to control just how much of a parent one of these parent objects are. So let's go ahead and just jot blend in here real quick. Now coming out of the blend, this is where we will connect up missile number 2. Excellent. Okay, so now this is going to create a very simple rig for us. So here we are, null number 2, just kind of, hanging out, sitting there, not doing anything. Now let's say that we're flying along between frame 0 and at frame 100, that's where I want to fire off the missile. At frame 100, we're going to need to take null number 2 and basically orient him to null number 1. So he's going to be in the exact same spot. So let's say at frame 100, this is where we are at. Null 1 and null 2 will be on top of each other and aligned at this point. Meaning that if we switch off, and what I mean by switch off is where missile 2 is parented to null 1, if all of a sudden we switch that parenting so that we are parented to null 2, you won't notice any difference whatsoever in the look of everything because, once again, the two nulls are exactly on top of one another. So that's what we need to do. We need to set a keyframe. Now, with these guys, meaning null 1 and null 2, we have weights. So what I'm going to do is we'll come in here. We'll have one of these guys, we'll have a weight 1, one of them will be a weight 2. And basically the parameter works with a range of 0 to 1, with 1 being 100% influence. So if I was to set this guy to a value of 1 and this guy over here to a value of 0, that means my missile is 100% parented to this guy here and none at all to the other guy. So what we'll do is come in at frame 99 and we'll make sure to keyframe a value of 1 on null 1, and over here, and again, these parameters are being set on the blend node. At frame 99, we will keyframe a value of 0 for weight number 2, meaning no influence from null 2. Now, one frame later, at frame 100, we will simply set this guy's value to 0. And over here for weight 2 at 100, we'll set this guy to a value of 1. Now, moving past 100, we can animate the second null moving forward, and the missile will be parented to him. So now we can have it look as if it, maybe drops down a little bit and then takes off because the thruster kicks in. The plane is free to continue on. It can bank out of the way. It can do whatever. It's shot off its missiles. It's going to head back to the base. So this animation applied to our jet has no effect whatsoever on the missile now, because the missile at this point is only listening to null number 2. And if you notice, null number 2 at no time listens to anything coming from the jet. He stands out there on his own, so we can just simply keyframe that. Now this is known as a very simple rig. Basically just a few nodes that are being set up, and they're like helper nodes helping us solve a problem. And that's pretty much it. Is there anything that you would like to add into this, Steve?
At this time, no, there's not.
Okay, well, I guess that means I did a fairly good job.
Yes.
So with that, I'm thinking real quick. For some reason, I just have this gut feeling there was one more thing that I wanted to say. I'll just point out that this is a very simplistic rig, and rigs can get much, much more complex than this. They can involve a lot of math. They can involve a lot of nodes. Just keep that in mind. But I think it's pretty cool that we're introducing them to a simple rig this early on.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so Steve, let's go ahead and jump over to Houdini, and then inside of Houdini we can begin doing all of our animation.
Okay, so let's start by clearing out some of the parameters that we've already got values on from when we were demonstrating the parenting a few videos back.
Yeah, that sounds good. Like -700 and some odd.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. So we can zero that out to get rid of any Z rotation whatsoever. And we've also got to translate Y of 1. We can just zero that out as well. Fantastic. So with that, let's decide which missile is going to be the missile we launch, because he's going to be the guy that needs that. It's a very basic rig put in place. And
so that this matches our drawings on the whiteboard. Let's go with the missile that's closest to us right now.
So this guy?
Yep.
And he's going to be on our left of the plane?
Yep, and let's go ahead and name him Missile 2.
Fantastic. So we can name this guy to Missile 2. And I'm going to swap them over, because
Yeah.
otherwise that's going to hurt my head. Fantastic.
Now time for the basic rig.
Yeah, so we got our jet. This missile is always going to be parented to the jet. We're not launching him. This missile needs that basic rig that we demonstrated on the whiteboard. So I'm going to make sure that I check keep position when parenting, because I'm about to unparent this guy and I don't want him to jump.
Though he shouldn't jump now because you zeroed the jet back. So.
That is very true.
But yeah, that's cool. Go ahead.
So unparent him, and I'm going to drop in a null. And this null is going to be the null that follows our jet. It's going to be parented to the jet. And the first thing I'd like to do is just position it so it makes more sense. So I'm going to position it roughly center of the missile. So let's jump into a top view with space 2. I'm going to push W to bring up wireframe and just position this guy in X and Z.
And just as a reminder, everyone, this is not a precise science here. There's no precision behind this. It's required.
It's just so that it kind of is in the same area as the missile, just so that it doesn't confuse everyone having some locator that's floating out here, and when we parent our other null to it, our missile suddenly snaps down here. That would be very confusing.
That's right.
So, yeah, and apologies for just calling that a locator. It's actually a null. That was my Maya days slipping back in.
And it's funny because I've heard locator for so many years from my Maya days that I just accept it.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to get this null. Before I parent him in, let's duplicate him to make our second null. So Control C, Control V. And now, again, I don't want this guy to jump when we parent, even though the channels are zeroed out. Just to be safe, we'll check this. Fantastic. So we've got our two guys that we want our missile to blend between parents-wise. So let's create a blend node. So I push tab to bring up the tab menu, typed blend, enter, and enter again to drop the blend in place. And let's wire null 1 into the blend, wire null 2 into the blend, and then wire that blend as the parent of our missile. So with that in place, currently both guys have a weight of 1.
Yeah, all right, let's make sure everybody sees that. So there we are on the blend tab, and on the blend tab we've got a weight 1 and a weight 2.
Weight 1 corresponding to our first input being null 1, weight 2 corresponding to our second input being null 2.
And check this out, right now both weight 1 and weight 2 have a value of 1, so basically we have 100% desire to have each of these nulls as our parent.
Yeah, so we're really going to get a 50-50.
So if you take our jet and let's go ahead and transform our jet.
Let's just translate him up in Y, and you'll see that we're 50% between. So,
and you can leave it like that for just a second. Go back to the blend node and start taking away weight number 2. And look at this. Boom. He goes back up to where he needs to be.
Or if we boost him up to 1 and take away from weight 1.
And beautiful.
Fantastic. So we want to start out following the jet. So we'll set our weight to such.
Okay.
And let's zero out that translate Y again. So we've got our basic rig in place, everything is working correctly, so now we can go ahead and basically create the animation for our jet by creating a curve that the jet is going to follow.
Okay, let's walk through the creation of the curve very slowly for those that are new to working with the curve.
So just going to zoom out a little because our curve is going to be fairly large compared to the jet.
Go and turn the grid on.
Fantastic. And I'm going to come up here to our Create tab at the shelf and grab our curve. And now we have the ability to place CVs. So I'm going to place a starting CV around here. We are going to extend the straight section of the curve in a second.
I just want to point out that over in the network editor, we did have a geometry node put down called curve_object1.
I'm going to start clicking out points to make this guy bank off to the right. And the reason for that is that the missile we're firing is on the left wing. So we want him to bank to the right and fire the missile that's on basically on the wing that's on the opposite side.
Or we could have it fire, then he banks away as the missile then goes straight.
Yeah,
Either way.
that would make sense.
Okay.
That's probably what we'll end up doing. So I'm going to enter to accept this curve, and there's a few issues with the curve. Firstly, if we jump down inside our network, or we could have used the options at the top.
We could
of
have,
the
or
pane.
hit enter and jump in, okay.
Exactly. We can see we're dealing with a polygonal curve, and that's going to give us a very jarring motion because we'll move along straight line segments. So let's make this guy a NURBS curve. Let's also come in and select points from our geometry select mode and grab the select tool. And we're also going to turn on the display of points so that when we lose our selection we can see where the points are. So I did that by clicking the display points button up there. So let's change some of the altitudes of our points, our positions in Y of the points. I push T to grab the move tool.
Since our jet it will be following along this curve path, it'd be kind of cool to have it bank off to the right and climb in altitude as it does it.
Exactly, something a bit like that. Maybe that's a bit too sharp.
That's good, and bring that one up a little bit.
Out in Z as well?
Yeah. There we go.
Something like that?
Yep.
Also, the straight part of the jet's flight currently is very short, so let's grab this first CV and just slide him way back in Z. So that's going to give us a longer straight, and then we ease into the bank, and then we'll get the sharp bank at the end. Fantastic. So with that, I'm going to push U with my mouse over the network editor to jump back up to object level, turn off the display of points, and I'm going to turn off our grid. So now that we've got our curve in place, we can tell the jet to follow the curve very simply. Let's just call this guy, I'm renaming the geometry node for our curve to jet
path.
Yeah, jet path is a great name. So jet path. And with that guy renamed, we can come to our jet's geometry node, and we have the ability to specify a path object, and we're going to specify that jet path curve that we created. So let's accept. And we're going to snap to the beginning of the curve. Now, currently I've got my play bar collapsed down, so let's bring him back up. And we'll see if we change our time, nothing is going to happen, and that's because we have to specify using keyframes, using animation, the position of our jet with 0 beginning, meaning the beginning of the curve. As we increase up to 1, we'll hit the end of the curve. If we go over 1, we actually start looping along the curve. So I'm going to set a keyframe at frame 1 with a position of 0 by Alt left clicking on the position parameter. That will set a keyframe there. And I'm going to probably give this guy 2 seconds to fly to the end. Is that maybe slightly too long? Second and a half?
Yeah, it's probably slightly long. Yeah, second and a half. Maybe.
So that's around 36 frames.
Okay.
So because we're dealing with 24 frames a second. So let's go to frame 36, set our position parameter to 1. That'll move us to the end of the curve, and Alt left click to set another key there. I will also shrink the range that we're looking at, just so that we're only really dealing with this small piece of animation. So now if we click play to watch that back, and I will turn on real time. So you can see our jet is following the curve, but he's not really banking when he gets to that corner. So we have the ability to basically specify a roll, and I'm going to do this manually as opposed to using auto bank, because it's nice to have full control over the roll. So at any point on the curve, we can use this roll parameter to basically roll our jet around that curve. So what we can do, obviously starting out we're flying straight, so it makes no sense for him to have a roll currently. but we can put a roll on such that as he starts to approach the curve, he'll roll, and that's going to be what causes him to change direction. Once we've got that in place, we'll then come back and take a look at the animation curves, because there are going to be a few little issues so far with our animation curves on these guys. So at the start of the animation, I'm very happy to have 0 roll, so I'm going to Alt left click the roll parameter. And this is about the point where we start beginning the bank, so just a few frames before that I want to start a roll. So I'm going to again key at 0.
So you anchor it basically. So it's going to be a hold at value 0 before then.
And then as we hit, after this point we're no longer really rolling, so at this point we should probably hit our maximum roll. So I'm going to middle click to bring up the value ladder and just increase our roll in the positive direction so that we turn into our curve. It would make very little sense to roll in the other direction.
It'd be
kind
an
of
odd animation.
Very unusual.
Yeah.
Look like a sensible amount of roll there? Fantastic. So I'm going to Alt click again to set that key. So now we have 0 roll, and then as we start to hit the curve, we roll into it, and that's going to be what causes us to turn. So there's the basic keys in place, but obviously we're going to need a little bit of tweaking. I'm not going to spend all day tweaking. We want this video to be fairly quick. But the position especially is going to have a rather major issue currently due to the way that the animation curve is by default. So let's right click on our position parameter, come down to channels and keyframes, and come down to scope channels, and that'll bring up the channel editor on our curve. I'm going to push space H to home up on our curve, and you can see that we ease in and ease out.
Meaning we accelerate into our constant motion and then we decelerate.
Which, if we minimize our channel editor for a second, that doesn't make very much sense when it's not like we're taking off and landing.
Right.
We should be hitting this motion at full speed and leaving this motion at full speed. And if we were to have a change in speed, maybe we'd accelerate or decelerate just before the bank. But we shouldn't start out, stopped, and accelerate into the motion and then decelerate at the end. That makes no sense. So I'm going to basically set this guy to be linear. So let's grab both of our keys and set this guy to be a linear curve. Wow, all the UI buttons are very tiny.
Oh, you don't got your glasses on. I did not even realize that.
Yeah.
But we need to...
There we go. So yeah, select the first keyframe, and there is this button here is a straight line. Wow, yeah, without my glasses on, with the small resolution we're running at, everything's kind of blurry. That's really bad. So you can click on straight. That's going to give us a linear animation curve. That means we have no acceleration and no deceleration. So with that, we can close out the editor. I'm going to leave the roll as is. I'm fairly happy with the way that guy's rolling. So that's really the jet animation sorted. So with that, let's turn our attention over to our missile. So first things first, we need to decide when are we going to launch the missile? At what frame do we want to launch the missile? And it would make sense that we launch and then bank away from the missile after we launch. So sometime after we leave, but before we bank. So should we say around frame 15?
Yeah, that looks good.
So at frame 15, we're going to launch the missile, and that means we need to do a number of things at this frame and also at frame 14. We need to grab our second null, because if we were to currently blend between our null here and this null, you can see that our missile suddenly jumps.
Yeah.
And that's bad. So let's bring our second null so that it is sitting on the exact same location as our first null. So to do this, I'm going to, got the move tool already selected, I'm going to push V to invoke point snapping. And I'm going to snap this guy to the other null. I may need to turn off some of our other... There we go. So I'm going to snap him to the other null, so he's in the exact same position, and with him in that position, I am going to set a key on all of the translation parameters. Now, at the frame previous to this, that's going to be the last frame where we're following our first null. So on the blend node, I'm going to key weight 1 and weight 2. Weight 1 being at 1, weight 2 being at 0, meaning we're following our first null. And on frame 15, I'm going to set weight 1 to 0 and weight 2 to 1, meaning we are now following our second null. And I'm going to set keys on that. So over the period of one frame, we switch from following null 1 to following null 2. And we can see this I'm just going to push W, come back into shaded mode. Our missile follows the jet, boom. We now leave him behind because he's following that second null. So that means from frame 15 onwards, or really from frame 16 onwards, because at 15 we want the null to be in that location.
Yeah, so I would say over the next 7 frames, match the distance of it, but drop it down in Y as if the missiles come off and down some.
But yeah, from frame 16 onwards, we can now animate null 2. That's going to animate our missile. So I'm going to come forward about 7 frames, so around to sort of early 20s, 21,
yeah,
22.
about there. Looks good.
So yeah, let's match our position in Z, because we're going to pick up the momentum of the jet. So when we drop, until we start decelerating, we're going to pick up the jet's momentum. We'll carry on moving forwards, but gravity's going to take over. The jet's no longer holding us, so we are going to drop down in Y. So let's translate in Z over to about the position of the wing, and drop down in Y.
A little bit less than that. A little bit. It's right there.
Around here. Fantastic. And with that, we can Alt-click on Translate to set another key. You'll notice that Y and Z were keyed. X wasn't keyed because we haven't changed the value in X since our other keyframe. So now the missile follows the jet. As we hit frame 15, we switch over to the null, and we start dropping down. We are going to have slight problems currently with our animation curves. If you notice, if you have a very keen eye, you'll realize that we've just created yet another translation-based animation. We're going to have that ease in, ease out, which our jet doesn't have. So our missile does behave rather interestingly, and doesn't quite follow up with the jet. We'll deal with that once we come to cleaning up all the animation. For now, we've got our rough keys in place, and we'll leave them be. So from this point, we really just want our missile to take off, to accelerate. So he's going to just basically travel in Z, and we'll let him just travel in a fairly straight line in Z. So I'm going to just take us to the end of our animation, and I'm going to grab Translate Z and move him a fairly large distance, not too far, but obviously he's going to now overtake the jet. And with him now positioned in Z, I'm going to Alt left click on our translation values, and that's just going to set a key on Z. Y and X haven't changed. So now our jet comes along, we launch the missile, and then our missile is going to take off. So all that's left to do is really clean up the animation curves and our translation parameters, because currently we have got that ease in, ease out, and we want to clean those up. So I'm going to basically scope our translate parameter, and I'm going to do that by shift left clicking our translate parameter. That will bring up the channel editor, and it will bring up all of our scope channels we have so far. And to just view our translations, we can single click on, say, Translate X. Translate X doesn't actually change, so I'm going to single click on Translate Y, shift click on Translate Z, and that will give us both of those curves. And I will maximize this to full screen.
Make it a little easier to see.
Fantastic. So let's just bring our attention to Translate Z to begin with. And you can see that we ease in, and we ease out, and then we ease in and ease out. We know that our jet at this point has linear acceleration, so we really want to hit this guy linearly. So I basically make this line segment as straight. And then as we come into this, we really want our missile to take off. It's going to basically fire its thruster and accelerate. So I want to follow the jet's motion and then accelerate. And so we're not going to decelerate at the end. So let's change our animation curve such that we start off straight, 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 and then we're going to accelerate into the rest of our curve. Now let's take a look at Translate Y. I'm fairly happy with how Translate Y is taking place. We are going to accelerate into our Translate Y, and obviously I don't want a sudden jolt when we stop changing in Translate Y, because that will alert the viewer to the fact that we have stopped changing in Translate Y, so an ease in, ease out is going to be perfect there. So with that, we can close out our graph editor, and let's just take a look at the animation. So I've deselected everything in the network, so we don't have any handles over.
So we can go ahead and bring our camera view around somewhere over in there.
Something like this?
Yeah.
And let's hide out the visibility of the nulls. Let's hide out our jet path by turning off the visibility. I'm also going to hide out the blend because it creates a small spherical object at the point of the blend, which we don't need to see. So I only really want visibility on our jet and our two missiles. And with that, let's click play.
There you go.
Pretty cool.
And that's all I was really looking for in this
it's
video.
very basic.
Once again, this is sort of a bonus video for the class. Wasn't planning on doing this, as we're just hitting the fundamentals and getting everything wrapped up. But I thought it would be fun if we just took a few minutes, 15, 20 minutes, and put together a very simple rig demonstrating how to go about doing this. Now, there are other ways that we could have set this rig up, and these will be things that will be explored in later videos at 3D Buzz. But that's pretty much going to wrap up our focus on basic keyframe animation. Thanks a lot, everyone.